Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Ajax Public Library's Adult Sleep Seminar, presented by the Canadian Mental Health Association. I'm so pleased that you could all join us this evening. I'm Julia Campbell, and I'm the Adult Services Librarian at the Ajax Public Library. I wanted to start by quickly covering a couple of housekeeping items. As I mentioned, today's presentation is being recorded, so I would ask that you please keep your webcam and microphones off to protect your privacy and also so that you are not displayed or heard in the recording. The camera and microphone icons can be found at the bottom left of your screen. After the presentation, we will have some time for a Q&A, at which point I will stop the recording so that everyone feels comfortable sharing. And at that point, please feel free to unmute yourself and turn your camera back on if you wish to do so. Our chat button is along the bottom. If you have any questions or comments you would like to share, you have the option of chatting with everyone, or you can send a private message to me, Julia. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation, and we will do our best to get to them either during the presentation or in the Q&A at the end. If you would prefer not to see the chat along the side, you can click the chat button again and it will disappear. And just to test out the chat, if you feel comfortable sharing where you heard about today's program, please enter it in the chat. If you experience any technical difficulties this evening, I recommend that you exit the program and re-enter. If you continue to have difficulties, please place a comment in the chat and I will do my best to assist you. I think that covers the basics, but if any other questions come up, please don't hesitate to use the chat function as I will be monitoring it throughout the presentation. Before introducing our presenter, I wanted to do a quick poll just to see what sleep issues most people are struggling with most tonight. The poll is anonymous and I will launch it now. So if you wouldn't mind just taking a moment to answer the poll question. It is, what sleep-related issue are you currently struggling with the most? So would that be falling asleep, staying asleep, not having a sleep routine, sleeping too much, or not feeling tired at bedtime? So I'll just give everyone about 1 minute to answer the poll question. So I'll leave it open for about another 20 seconds or so. Okay. So in this group, most people are struggling with staying asleep, but it looks like almost every issue impacts our audience tonight. So that is good for us to know. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter for this evening, Candice Singh. Candice has worked in the nonprofit sector for over 5 years, helping to support the healthy development of the social determinants of health. She holds an honors Bachelor of Science and advocates for both physical and mental health. Currently pursuing a Master of Education, Candice is passionate about using education as a way to engage and inform communities of the importance of accessing community support, such as libraries and mental wellness organizations like the Canadian Mental Health Association of Durham. Welcome, Candice.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction. So yes, my name is Candice and I am your guest presenter from the Canadian Mental Health Association in Durham region. So each of the CMHAs, it's very different from CAMH. We focus on wellness at CMHA and we offer these workshops to the community to help promote wellness in any sort of aspect of your life. So thank you so much for having me today. So today we're talking about sleep. So I was taking a look at the poll actually, and it looks like most people have a hard time staying asleep. So that's good to know. Good thing is we're going to be addressing all of the things that were in that poll. So you'll be able to learn a lot of some sleep tricks and sleep hacks to not only fall asleep, but to stay asleep for the entire duration of the night. Okay, so welcome to our webinar here. I will give you a brief sort of overview as to what we're going to be talking about. So today we're going to be talking about what is sleep hygiene. So we know what hygiene is, and we often talk about hygiene in our lives and in terms of mental health and wellness, but we don't usually talk about sleep in relation to hygiene. So we'll address that. We'll talk about what sleep is and why we need it. Why is it even important? We'll also talk about how much sleep we do need and how much sleep we need at different stages in our lives. We'll talk about the relationship between sleep and mental health conditions. Then we'll go on to talk about predispositions and triggers that's going to prevent us from sleeping well and staying asleep. Then we'll move on to talk about good sleep hygiene and develop our plan of action. So today you'll leave here with some documents. Julia has said that she would send you some documents that I'll be providing to really sort of kickstart your plan of action to maintain your good sleep habits. So if you do have any questions, I encourage you to put, just because I'm looking at the number of participants, I do encourage you to put those questions in the chat. And Julia will stop me at any point really to let me know that there are some questions that come up. So don't be shy to ask those questions. So what is sleep hygiene? So sleep hygiene refers to the habits and behaviors people follow to prepare for and stay asleep. We talk about hygiene in the terms of cleanliness, in terms of taking a shower or maybe brushing our teeth, maybe being clean or even applying deodorant. These are things that we talk about in relation to hygiene. So how does sleep fit in there? When we talk about clean sleep, we talk about the habits and behaviors, the good habits and behaviors that allow us to prepare for sleep and stay asleep. So this is only a 60-minute presentation, but I'm really going to give you all the tools that you need. We're actually going to develop this toolkit together to learn how to sleep well and identify different methods. We'll share some tips and tricks together on how we can improve our quality of sleep. So what is sleep and why do we need it? Sleep is important for so many different things. It's naturally reoccurring state of mind and body characterized by altered consciousness, relatively inhibits sensory activity, inhibition of nearly all voluntary muscles, and it's important that I note voluntary muscles here. So the muscles that we think about to move. Okay, so our heart is considered involuntary, so it consistently beats as long as we are alive. All voluntary muscles and reduced interactions with surroundings. So I'm going to ask if someone's brave enough to post in the chat here, what do you think the purpose of sleep is? I'm going to take a peek here and see what some of your responses are. To reboot, to re-energize, to rejuvenate, to restore. I see a trend here. We're thinking about all the re's. Any other sorts of ideas as to what what the purpose of sleep is for? To rest your mind and body. Okay, I like that. I like that definition there. So let's dig a little bit deeper and talk about the science of sleep here. So yes, all of your responses are absolutely correct. Yes, cell renewal. That's awesome. I think we have some science people in here. That's awesome. Helps your body remain healthy. That's awesome. These are all correct responses. So exactly as you mentioned, sleep helps to restore our bodies. So the re's, all the things that you've mentioned. It helps to restore our immune system. It helps to restore our nervous system, our skeletal system, and our muscular systems. So it really helps to restore the entirety of the body. Every day that we are alive, these micro sort of damages happen to our body. And I'm not saying that necessarily we see it, so it could be internal as well as external. So little things that we do, maybe we have maybe we drank that the night before. Okay, our livers will need to sort of repair itself. Maybe we decided to binge watch a series on Netflix. Our brains need the time to repair itself. So each day that we are alive, it's normal and natural to create these little micro damages in our bodies. And sleep is really that time where our body has nothing else to worry about except for repair. It maintains your mood, your memory, and your cognitive functioning. So just as it does with your systems in your bodies, it's also maintaining and repairing your brain. So sleep allows your body to heal and repair without the worry of having to react to daily stressors. So you being at rest and your body being at rest and your mind being at rest allows your body to take the second to heal and not have to worry about the stress and anxiety that we are dealing with on a daily basis. So I'm pausing at this specific slide because I think it's really important to note how many people are interested in this workshop, because likely your sleep has changed because of the pandemic. So your sleep is probably compromised right now, and you feel free to type that in the chat if you feel like since the start of the pandemic that might have been, a major change for you. So this is a natural reaction to a stressor. Sometimes we don't necessarily react in a physical way or in a way that we can see, but our bodies find some way of showing us that we're under serious stress and anxiety. So these little micro stressors that we're experiencing with the pandemic, especially now with sort of these waves and the lockdowns and the opening and the lockdowns and the opening and the feeling of being lonely, that all of these feelings sort of tax you, and when your body has a chance to rest is when we start to think about these things. Okay, so that really sort of affects and impacts your sleep cycle. Also, sometimes some of our coping mechanisms or our coping behaviors alter our sleep cycle. So maybe we are staying up and we're watching those Netflix series. Maybe we're turning to poor habits or what we call risk behaviors like drinking, or maybe there's other things that you're doing that's really something that you only picked up as at the start of the pandemic till now. So these are little changes that your body is kind of telling you, as a response to these stressors. So this is all normal occurrences. So the inability or the stressors that we're feeling because of the pandemic is all normal. So I'm going to validate that. And I'm going to hopefully help you to reestablish your sleep regime or your sleep hygiene.
And
So
Candace, we've just had one question.
yeah, of
Why
course.
why does binging on Netflix damage our brains?
Okay, that's a good question. So it's not necessarily binging on Netflix that damages the brain, it's the staying up late. So humans by nature are diurnal. So when I say diurnal, that means that we are by nature really alive and awake during the daytime. Okay, so when we have nocturnal animals, they sleep during the day and are awake at night. So us being diurnal, we're really flipping our bodies and our natural responses and our natural sort of desire to repair when we stay up really late. So it's not necessarily the binging of the Netflix. It's that it usually takes us late into the night. It's great to stimulate our brains. If you're watching something, depending on what you're watching, it might be great to stimulate your brain, but we do have to have a point where we stop and allow our brains to repair. Does that answer your question? I'm just trying to see if there's any other questions here. Okay. And you're absolutely, I do see somebody says insomnia isn't just because of the pandemic. You're absolutely right. Insomnia is something that we'll talk about that in an upcoming slide. So insomnia is actually hereditary as well. There's many different causes to insomnia. But when we talk about we see a lot more interest I can say specifically at the Canadian Mental Health Association. We see a lot more interest in these sleep workshops because people are really struggling right now with their sleep cycle, or they're feeling like we're home. Most of us are home, but yet still we don't feel as rested as we should be. So those are the changes that are actually happening because of what we're feeling, with the stresses that we're feeling. Are there any other questions? I don't think I see any in the chat. Great. Okay, so we'll talk about the 4 stages of sleep because I think this is important to sort of address. The 4 stages of sleep, which I'm sure many of you have heard, are what we refer to as REM. So NREM and REM. So when we say NREM, that's rapid eye movement stage. Okay, so this means our eyes, exactly as we mentioned, our eyes are not moving at this stage, and I'll explain why our eyes move. So we have NREM stage 1. In this stage, we call it the transitional stage. We're sort of floating in and out of consciousness when we start to fall asleep. So this is the very first stage of our sleep cycle. We're partially awake while our minds begin to drift off. So this is where our muscles jerk. This is where a lot of people dream that they're falling down the stairs. and they're jolted back up to an awakened state. Now, if we're able to pass stage 1 and we enter NREM or stage 2, this is what we call the light stage. Our heart rate begins to slow down. Our core temperature drops as well. Our brain waves slow down as well with the occasional bursts of waves. So it's what we call sleep spindles. So you kind of fall a little bit closer to stage 1 and then back up to stage 2. You go through these alternating periods of muscle tone and relaxation. So you have these muscle contractions, muscle relaxation. It's about 50% of your sleep. Okay. So it's really interesting because I know that we sort of talk about these stages and we say, oh, we're just not getting enough REM sleep. So the idea here is that we go through each one of these cycles, but we spend a majority of the time in NREM stage 2. And this is normal that we spend most of our time here. Now, if we're able to move on to stage 3, so if you fall back into a deeper sleep, it's what we call the deep sleep. So people often associate REM with being the deep sleep, but actually NREM is. This deep sleep stage, it's really difficult to wake up from. So this is likely where our alarms really sort of push us to wake up in the morning and we feel disoriented and groggy. It's a slow wave sleep. So it's called SWS, delta wave sleep. Blood pressure here drops and continues to drop, and our breathing slowly becomes deeper, slower, and more rhythmic. Okay, so we're starting to feel ourselves sort of relax in this stage. Our bodies become immobile, but we can still function. So our brains are still functioning. This is where we tend to dream. So we get things like nightmares. Children get things like bedwetting and sleepwalking. At this stage, though, this is where our hormones rejuvenate. Okay, so our rejuvenating hormones are therefore released at this stage, and this is where we see growth and appetite control. So with children, this is the stage that they need to fall into to really focus on growth. Okay. For those of you who have issues with your appetite, maybe you're overweight, maybe you're underweight, this is the stage that you sort of want to reach to, because our hormones at this stage are being released, which will help us with appetite suppression and appetite control. Okay. Now, if we're able to pass this, so it's interesting, not everybody gets past stage 3. So if we're able to pass stage 3 and fall into the REM sleep, this is what we call rapid eye movement. It's exactly that. Your eyes are closed, but they're moving left and to right really quickly. It only comprises about 20% of our sleep. In infants, it's about half of their sleeps, about 50% of their sleep. Our minds energize and our body is immobile at this stage. Breathing still is shallow, but at this stage, it's not as rhythmic. It's actually irregular. So those with sleep apnea, you will see that more prominent in this stage. Heart rate and blood pressure tend to rise. That's really interesting. So you see how this ends up being a cycle. So NREM and NREM stage 2 and NREM stage 3, we see a decline in our heart rate, but our heart rate starts to sort of climb a little bit more in the REM stage. Okay. It's where our dreaming sort of heightens and our brain waves heighten. It's very similar to wakefulness. And this is where our brains heal. So we ideally like to get here if we have things that are taxing or damaging to our brain. So those of you who work night shifts, you really want to try and get to the REM sleep so that we can reset ourselves. It revitalizes your brain, supports sharp and alert daytime function. Okay, so this is really the stage that we need to repair those organs, including our brain. So I'm going to throw a question out here and see what your responses are. I have here a study that has determined that those with depression, so individuals with depression, actually spend more time in REM sleep stage. So they're actually spending more than 20% of their sleep cycle in REM stage. So I'm going to ask you, why do you think that's the case? You can post your responses in the chat. To repair, so I'm seeing a response to repair the brain cells. Anyone else want to guess? They worry a lot more. Okay. Repair cells. Just gonna wait for a few more responses. Active brain. Yeah. Interesting. So you guys are absolutely right. So when we have things like depression and anxiety, we're actually causing these like little micro scratches on our brain. Okay. I like to refer it or give the analogy of taking a handful of sand or a handful of pebbles and rubbing it against a TV screen. Okay. So doing it once. So like I mentioned to you with the Netflix binge watching. Okay. So maybe you have one night of staying up late and watching and binge watching your show. That's one swipe of your hand filled with sand on your TV screen. It's not going to cause much damage, but when we have this repetitive sort of damage, your body needs to heal this. So when we have things like anxiety and depression, specifically a depression, we're causing these little damages to our brain. And our bodies need that REM sleep to repair our brain. So your body is telling you if you have depression to sleep because your body needs to heal. So you'll find people with depression often spend a lot more time sleeping because their bodies are telling them to take that moment to slow down so that they can repair all the damage that was being done. Okay. So let's talk about the next little bit. Let's talk about just how much sleep we actually need. So how much sleep do we need? This chart is pretty interesting. Our sleep needs to change as we age. The older we become, the less sleep we need. So when we talk about this chart, we're actually referring to healthy individuals. So it's really interesting. I think it's really interesting to note that as a child, of course, we need more sleep, but look at where we get to at the teenage years. So we need about 8 to 10 hours of sleep. When we step into the 7 and 11 hours, it may be appropriate, but we're kind of taking a little bit or a little too less, a little bit more, a little bit less. Where I think it's really interesting is that an older adult, so anyone over 65, okay, only needs about 7 to 8 hours. They can go as little as 5 to 6 hours of sleep. Why do you think that is? Similar to our response with our depression. Anyone want to guess why do we need less sleep? That's interesting. So I see that somebody has posted that their lifestyle is less demanding. Okay. Less active. So actually the response has to do with growth. Okay? So we spend a lot of our time growing and we know that our bodies release those hormones in our sleep. So we do spend a lot more time sleeping at a newborn stage because their growth rates are a lot faster. At an infant stage, we sort of see it plateau. We say plateau, so level out at the adult stage. So young adults and adults require the same amount of sleep because they're no longer growing. And as an older adult, you're no longer in need of that much sleep because you've reached your peak of your growth cycle. Okay, it's where our bodies sort of plateau. Growth is no longer happening, so we can really sort of compromise our sleep at that stage. Okay, so I think it's really interesting to point that out because we often feel like, oh, well, we need to sleep a lot more. So let's talk about insomnia before we get into our plans of action here. So there is a relationship between sleep and mental health. Of course, what would the seminar be if I didn't talk about mental health and mental health conditions, being from CMHA? So when we talk about insomnia, I know that a lot of people sort of toss this word around, but and sort of say, "Oh, I suffer from insomnia. I'm not getting enough sleep." So insomnia is actually dissatisfaction with the sleep quality and also the quantity. That should say quantity there, characterized by difficulty initiating sleep, maintaining sleep, or early morning awakenings that cause significant distress or impairment in daytime functioning. So I think it's important to point out here that we're talking about daytime functioning because, as I mentioned before, humans are diurnal. So we determine our ability to sleep based off of our daytime activity. Okay. and occur at least 3 nights per week for at least 3 months, despite adequate opportunity for sleep. So another important point here is how long it lasts. Okay, 3 nights per week for at least 3 months. Okay, so that's really where the diagnosis sort of comes into play. And another good point to point out here is despite adequate opportunity for sleep. So I'm not necessarily talking about those of you who may be working a night shift. Okay, so you don't have the opportunity to sleep. This is for somebody who has the opportunity to sleep. They have the setup, the ability to sleep, but they simply cannot, and they cannot sleep for 3 months. Okay, or at least 3 nights per week for 3 months. So there are several risk factors that happen as a result of insomnia. Okay, so insomnia is actually a risk or puts you at high risk for depression, anxiety, hypertension, type 2 diabetes. So let's stop there. It's interesting that insomnia ends up being a risk factor for depression. So your body's reaction when you do have depression is to sleep more. Okay, now, how does that play out? It's often associated with the inability to repair. So your depression is really sort of taxed if you do have insomnia and depression. And your ability to sort of repair at that stage is extra compromised. Now we have insomnia related to increased alcohol and substance use when we sort of disturb our sleeping ability. We have health risk behaviors. As I mentioned, anything that we do that risks our health is called a health risk behavior. So alcohol consumption is considered a health risk behavior. Doing risky activities, maybe recklessly driving, that would also be a health risk behavior. Smoking is a health risk behavior as well. So we also see things associated with these outcomes, such as increased healthcare use. Of course, you're going to have to go to the doctor more often if you are experiencing any of the following things. Now we have accidents that will happen a little bit more often because you are reducing your motor function. Okay. And we have accidents in so many different ways. I know this has pointed out motor and non-motor vehicle accidents, but there's lots of different ways that these things sort of happen. Okay. And it also increases your chronic pain because, again, we need that sleep to repair. So our body's sort of responding with pain throughout all these things. Okay. So, how do we fix this? Well, first we have to identify what is the cause of our insomnia. So some of us have predispositions and triggers that will kind of really sort of invite insomnia. Some of us are born with something called the hyperarousability trait. It's a genetic trait that means that we actually have sensitivity to stressors. So we're hypersensitive to these stressors. Being female also is a predisposition for insomnia. Our body's natural responses are really designed for childbearing. So we sleep a lot lighter than most people than say males. Okay, so being female is a predisposition. Aging, as I mentioned before, is a predisposition, mostly because of the fact that your body is changing in a sort of a rapid way. Family history of insomnia, personal history of insomnia, presence of a psychiatric disorder is also a predisposition and trigger for insomnia. Now, it's important to also point out here that taking medications to help taking medications on a whole, but a lot of psychiatric medications do affect your risk of insomnia or do trigger insomnia. Increased stress. So right now, because all of us are experiencing increased stress associated with the pandemic, is certainly a predisposition for insomnia or a trigger for insomnia. Changes in work schedule. So any sort of change in any sort of schedule that affects your ability to sleep on time or affects your ability to follow through with your sleep schedule will certainly be a predisposition or trigger for your insomnia. Okay. Physical health problems and mental health problems, as I discussed before, including traumatic events, will also be predisposition. So anything that sort of taxes our mind. Okay. So let's start to build our sleep hygiene. Let's share some ideas. I'm curious to hear what sort of hacks we already have that we can share with others. So I'm going to ask you here, what is your advice for a good night's sleep? What's your advice for falling asleep and staying asleep? And I'm going to take some notes here to see which ones are already addressed that I'm going to talk about later. Anybody have any ideas? Exercise and a good diet. It's a good one. No caffeine past a certain time. Azarina, do you know what time that might be? To read, less stress, meditation. Yeah. A routine. Awesome. Do you want to describe that routine, Megan? 5 p.m., Azarina says. Okay. Get up and go to bed at the same time. No sugar and no salt. Interesting. No eating within an hour before bed. Yeah. Melatonin. Oh, nice. That's a good one. That's melatonin and chamomile tea. Yeah. To read, stretching. Any other tips or tricks? A dark room. Yeah. No caffeine 4 hours before sleep. Okay. Okay, so you can continue to add your tips into the chat, and I'm going to share some sort of feedback with you here. Okay, so I've given you some tips. I'm actually going to be giving it to you in a handout, so you don't necessarily need to write any of the things that I'm going to say. But there are quite a few tips that the Sleep Council has laid out. First, I'm going to highlight this funny cartoon here where if you don't follow, it's a heart speaking, sorry, it's the brain speaking to the person who owns the brain. Okay, so the brain is saying, would it help if I start calculating the maximum amount of sleep that we can get every few minutes? Okay, so this is something I encourage you to not do. Oftentimes we're so caught up with how much sleep we're getting, or we're so obsessed with the fact that we need to get enough sleep that we check how many hours of sleep we're going to get before we fall asleep. I'm going to encourage you or challenge you to not do that. That puts a lot of pressure on you just before bed, that your mind starts to automatically think, oh goodness, if I don't fall asleep within 2.5 seconds, I'm going to lose my 8 hours of sleep. So it certainly puts a lot more stress on you. Some other tips and tricks. Let's take a look at this slide. It says here, create a quiet, cool, dark, and comfortable bedroom environment. Okay, so that's really important. We're going to try to create the most relaxing space that we can make. We're going to use the bedroom for sleep and sex only, okay, nothing else. We're going to also try and remove all electronics and other distractions. Okay, so pretty tricky stuff. We're going to not drink caffeine 6 hours before bedtime. I'm actually going to tell you to avoid caffeine past 12 p.m., okay? Especially if you are sensitive to caffeine. If you're not as sensitive to caffeine, maybe you normally have 3 or 4 cups per day, and it doesn't necessarily stimulate you as much as the average person, then I would encourage you to not have any caffeine past 4 p.m., okay? Now, the fourth point here, it says, don't drink alcohol before bed. This is an interesting one. Oftentimes people that can't sleep will say, hey, I'm going to have a glass of wine or a glass of whiskey before I go to bed because it makes me feel tired. Yes, it does. For some people, it can make you feel tired, but it certainly disturbs your ability to fall into the NREM stage 1 and go past stage 1 to stage 2. It really sort of disturbs you. You bounce back and forth between stage 1 and stage 2. So you never quite get to NREM stage 3 if you drink alcohol before you go to bed. And our goal is to get to REM stage. Okay, so we want to get to that rapid eye movement stage where our brains are able to heal, and our bodies are able to heal. It's not a very long stage, so it's sort of a goal of ours. Okay, so not everybody does get to that stage, so it's important to point out too. The fifth point here is to make sure you exercise 3 hours before bedtime or earlier. Okay, so oftentimes people think, hey, if you can't sleep, go for a jog. So that's not necessarily true, because our bodies are actually more aroused or more awakened when we exercise. We're actually creating an environment of stress when we exercise. Now, this is good stress, but we want to start our days off with good stress. So, ideally, you want to exercise first thing in the morning rather than just before bedtime because your bodies and your brains are hyper aroused at that point. Don't go to bed hungry. Okay, so this is a double-edged sword, I would say. So you don't want to go to bed hungry, but you also don't want to eat right before bedtime. I'm going to actually encourage you. Actually, the last seminar that I taught, someone had mentioned, hey, what happens if you wake up in the middle of the night because you need to use the washroom? And that's what wakes you up. So there's lots of things to keep in mind here. Ideally, you don't want to have anything to drink 2 hours before your bedtime. Okay, so that way it gives your body enough time to sort of let it pass through your kidneys, and then you can go to the washroom and you're ready to go for the next 8 hours of your sleep. Same goes for food. So you don't want to sleep. Sorry, you don't want to eat 2 to 4 hours before your bedtime. So that's quite some time, right? Depending on the time that you go to bed. So the routine that you set, I'm going to say no more than two. Sorry, no food after more than later than 2 hours before your bedtime. Okay. Then the seventh point here says maintain a wake up and bedtime routine, which I'll show you in the next slide. And then the eighth point here says get out of bed if you can't go to sleep. Interesting point. If you're not tired, don't force yourself to go to bed. That is really interesting to point out because we sort of do something that's called conditioned arousal. So, conditioned arousal means we're forcing our beds to sort of be a cue to stay awake if we go to bed and we're not tired. So, things that we do, like play on our phones or watch TV, things that we do on our bed outside of sleep or sex will force our minds to think or associate our beds with playtime and awake time. Okay, so things like also blue light filters on your phone are sort of helpful, really, because they'll help to sort of trick your mind or remind your mind that this is not a daylight. So blue light, which is emitted from many of our phones, trick our brains into thinking this is daylight. Also, LED lights do the same. So the idea is to have soft lights around our bed space. So if you have a night lamp, you're going to look for softer lights, okay, that don't trick our minds into thinking that it's daytime. So I saw somebody posted about naps. So this point here says nap wisely. It says number 9, nap wisely. They're a good way to catch up on sleep, but if you nap too long or too late, you can have trouble falling asleep. So my suggestion here, and this is my suggestion from some of the students that I've taught before, what has worked for them is not having a nap that's longer than 30 minutes. Okay, 30 minutes is usually a great refresher. And actually, a lot of my students set an alarm. So they'll set an alarm that accounts for the 30 minutes that they're going to sleep. So maybe they set a 35-minute alarm. Okay. The idea here is you feel a lot more rested with your 30-minute sleep because you don't allow your body to fall into the NREM stage 3 at that point because you're only getting into NREM stage 1. And sometimes, depending on how quickly you fall asleep, sometimes you just lightly touch NREM stage 2. So you don't wake up groggy after a 30-minute nap. And it does help you to make you feel refreshed, and it doesn't interact or sort of compromise your sleep habits in the night. Okay. Now the last point here says move the clock away from your bedside. So the same thing with sort of tracking or timing our sleep. We really put a lot of pressure on ourselves to make up that 8 hours of sleep because we've heard that 8 hours of sleep is our goal. So the idea is forget about it. Just sleep and sleep as much as you can before your alarm goes off in the morning, and or before the time that in which you need to wake up. Because when we sort of trick our minds or tell our minds that we need to plan this, we're not allowing our brains to rest. Our brains are thinking something sort of stressful right before we go to bed. Are there any other tips that anyone wants to add or anyone wants to sort of question here?
Candace, I did get one question saying, I noticed it said to have a quiet room. Would you recommend listening to stories or audiobooks to try to get to sleep?
Right. Okay, that's a really great one that you mentioned. Awesome point to point out. So yes, you can read, you can listen to an audiobook, but I highly discourage reading a suspenseful book, a mystery book, or listening to something that'll spook you. So not necessarily listening to Criminal Minds or true crime podcasts just before you go to bed. We want something that really relaxes our minds and really allows us to sort of unwind right before we go to sleep. Okay, so this is not the point where we watch sort of suspenseful or stressful anything. So I've also included, some people do well with looking at their phones just before going to bed, because they say that this is the time that relaxes them. They watch YouTube videos. In my previous group, one of the students said that she likes to watch slime videos of like people making slime and playing with it, like the sensory videos. So you're welcome to do things like that. Anything that sort of relaxes your brain, please go ahead and do that, but nothing that's going to arouse you at that point. Any other questions? I'll take a look at the chat. Awesome. I do hear a lot of people with warm milk or Horlicks. Yeah, that's often a very good one. However, I would say avoid, like somebody had mentioned earlier, avoid the sugars if you can, about 4 hours before you go to bed. So it just allows, some people are more sensitive to sugar. So just like caffeine, we want to make sure that we reduce our sugar intake after lunch, after the lunch hour. So we allow our bodies enough time to digest and sort of break that down. Okay, because sugar can be an energy sort of trigger. Okay, so one of the things I want to mention here, which I'll show you a video that's going to summarize all of this, is to create a routine. So we're going to set a bedtime and then set an awake time. So my suggestion here is no later than 10:30 p.m. I know that that's actually quite generous. I would say 10 o'clock, but I do understand that a lot of us have things to do in the evenings. So the idea is that you want to set a 10:30 p.m. sleep and maybe a 6:30 a.m. wake or a 7 a.m. wake. Okay, so keep that consistent, and even keep that consistent throughout the weekend if you can, even if that means waking up at 6:30 in the morning and lying in bed until 10 o'clock. Okay, the idea is that our bodies are now conditioned to stay asleep for that period of time and wake up for the time in which we are expecting. Okay. Any other questions before I show this video? So I'm going to quickly show you a video here that's going to summarize all of all the things that I mentioned to this point, really. And you'll get sort of a better idea as to what I mean about creating good sleep hygiene. Okay.
51 sheep, 52 sheep, 53 sheep. Ugh, why am I still awake? Oh well, at least it's only 3 a.m. We've all been there. Getting quality sleep is easier said than done. So today, we're going to show you how sleep is tied to your physical and mental health. We're also going to show you 5 easy ways to get that refreshing sleep that you need. We all know that we feel groggy and slow when we don't get enough sleep. But that's not the only effect lack of sleep has on our bodies. In our episode on sleep and creativity, we told you that not getting enough sleep over an extended period of time can lead to high blood pressure, which can also lead to heart attacks and aneurysms. But it's not always easy to try to get that good quality sleep. Some nights, you stay awake worrying about that presentation that you have to give first thing in the morning. And then some nights, you just can't get comfortable. And then other nights, you fall asleep just fine. But then you wake up every 15 minutes worrying that you're going to miss the bus. All right, there's no one way to guarantee that you're going to get awesome sleep. But we do have 5 easy tips and tricks to help you get on the path towards good sleep hygiene. Step 1. Develop a relaxing bedtime ritual. When you think about it, we all learn to sleep by routine. When we were really little, our parents gave us baths, read us books, tucked us in, got us that extra glass of water, all in the name of good sleep. Now that you're older, you're going to have to develop a routine of your own. Whether it's a cup of decaf tea and a chapter from a book, or a bath and 15 minutes of mellow yoga. Of course, there are some activities that should be kept out of a bedtime ritual. Don't drink alcohol before bed. It might help you fall asleep, but chances are you'll wake up in the middle of the night. Don't exercise 2 hours before bedtime. Sure, it gets your blood flowing, but it'll amp you up mentally. Step 2. Maintain a regular sleep and wake schedule. Now, you don't have to wake up at exactly 7:02 and then go to bed at 10:53 every night. That's a bit on the neurotic side. But do try to wake up and go to bed at generally the same time 6 days a week. According to doctors at Harvard University, this will help set your internal clock so that even on those rare days when your schedule is thrown off, you'll be able to get right back on track and avoid what doctors call a sleep hangover. Step 3. Stop watching your clock. Studies show that people who constantly look at their clock are less likely to fall asleep easily. Why? Well, laying there thinking, it's 11:03, I have to be up in 6 hours and 57 minutes, stresses you out. So try to keep some distance between you and that alarm clock. That way, those blinking numbers will quit mocking you and you'll sleep easier. Step 4. Create an optimal sleep environment. A Mayo Clinic study found that people sleep best in dark, quiet, cool environments. With all the benefits of sleep, it's worth investing in blackout blinds, comfortable earplugs, and a fan or air conditioning. The more comfortable you are physically, the better you'll sleep. Step 5. Unplug. Make your bedroom a tech-free zone. I know, but research shows that electronics interfere with sleep because it's easy to get distracted by them. Checking your email right before bed could add more stress. Watching TV or movies makes it harder to sleep, and getting sucked into, say, Pinterest right before bed could keep you up for hours. Ooh, I like that. I like that too. Oh, that's pretty. Let's recap. Today we learned a few more reasons why you need good sleep. We also taught you 5 simple ways to help you improve your sleep health. Next time you're stuck tossing and turning, try to develop a ritual. Maintain a schedule, stop clock watching, trick your bedroom out, or unplug. It could help. From all of us here at Wellcast, sweet dreams.
Okay, so that's really the
You want-
summary here. I'm just going to take a look. Does anybody have any questions to this point?
I think we've received a couple others in the chat. Somebody said, I have heard a study recently that says our natural sleep rhythm is not for a continuous 8-hour period, but rather for 3 to 4 hours sleep, followed by a period of wakefulness, then further 3 to 4 hours. Do sleep studies ever take this into consideration when thinking about how we sleep?
Yes, certainly. Yeah. So every sleep cycles are really interesting things where we kind of bounce back and forth between sleeping and wakefulness, and some stages, as I mentioned before, are more, I guess, subjected to these wakefulness periods. So you're more likely to awaken in stage 1, for example. Whereas in stage 3, it's really a struggle to wake up. So those are the mornings where your alarm goes off, and you hit the snooze button a few times. You probably were in stage 3, or even the REM stage at that point. Okay, so where our bodies kind of slowly fall back into sleep, and we want to wake up, or it's a lot easier for us to wake up when we're in stage 1 or stage 2. So you're absolutely right. That study's absolutely correct.
Great. And then somebody asked about sleep apnea. Is sleep apnea spent mostly in REM?
Oh, that's a really good question. So sleep apnea is usually you usually start to see it in stage 3, where our breathing slows down, but our heart rate increases, which is so interesting why that's associated. But I would be interested in seeing some more studies about it just to sort of confirm. So it's hard to say. I think it really depends on the cause of sleep apnea. If it's medication induced, then your reaction can be totally different.
Great, thank you. And somebody else has asked about weighted blankets and whether they work.
Yeah, so weighted blankets are really fun. I think that's really in right now, actually. I think during the pandemic, quite a few people have been into the weighted blankets. Weighted blankets are really great because they, funny enough, they actually simulate you being in the womb. So our bodies sort of react to or recall these stages of us being in the womb where we felt protected and safe. So it allows our body to be vulnerable. So oftentimes people have a hard time falling asleep because they feel hyper aroused by their environment. Maybe there's a safety issue or a trauma that sort of happened that made them feel, maybe even just having kids. So there are some people that feel like they hear a child crying because they're so accustomed to hearing a child crying and they had to wake up. So the simulation of being in the womb really helps you. So yes, weighted blankets are a cool trick to use.
Great, thank you. Somebody else has asked about melatonin and magnesium. Are they recommended as sleep aids?
That one's a hard one for me to say yes or no. I think I've heard of many studies saying that melatonin is very effective with helping you sort of relax and calm. However, I don't know what its impacts are on sleep. I know it helps to calm you. I just don't know how effective that is on actually falling and staying asleep. So I have to do a little bit more research on that. Same
Okay.
with chamomile. Chamomile helps to relax you, but I don't know how long or how effective it is at helping you to stay asleep for the entire duration of the night.
And then there was just one last question. Can CPAP or CPAP users ever not have to use one?
Oh, that is up to you and your doctor for sure. CPAPs are great to help make sure that you get the oxygen levels that you need, and to sort of make sure that if you do have sleep apnea, that you are not sort of suffocating really. So CPAP machines go over your face, and they're designed to help you to maintain your oxygen levels of at least I think it's 92% if I'm not mistaken. So you would have to talk to your medical professional about that for sure. Your likely your family doctor. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you to something. Just being mindful of the time here. So I'm going to introduce or just briefly touch on the Sleep Council's sleep diary. So you'll be receiving really a blank form, and you were to fill out that blank form, or I encourage you to fill out that blank form, where we start to sort of track all of the sleep habits that we have. So it's a chart that looks, I can actually show it to you. I'm going to share my screen. I'm just going to stop my share here and show you what that looks like. Okay, so this is what the sleep diary looks like. Okay, can everybody see that?
I just see it says you're screen sharing, but I don't actually see the document.
Okay. Okay, maybe I think because it might be a locked document actually. I don't think I can share that one. So we'll take it back. Oh, can we see that?
Yes, I can see that now.
Okay, great. So this is the document that you'll be receiving. Everything that I've sort of mentioned is reviewed on the first page, and you'll see that it allows you to track your sleep in the morning, or that your morning routines, and then your nighttime routines. Okay, so this will help you to figure out, based off of all the information that I've given you today, where you sort of need or really sort of struggle with. Okay, so maybe you struggle with your caffeine consumption because you really can't get through that 3 o'clock meeting without your your extra cup of coffee. So you're really going to sort of list all these things, or the patterns or behaviors that you have, and try and pinpoint ways in which you can solve these or resolve this. So I'm going to supply you with all that information, and it'll be sent to you through Julia. I'm also going to give you the slides from today. So you will receive a document with all of the information that I've presented, including the links for all the things that I've showed to you today. Okay, so I think if you are happy to stay for the next couple of minutes, I do have a meditation class, or a quick mindful meditation that will help you to unwind for the evening. But before I show that, I'm going to ask if anyone has any questions. I'm also going to be giving you my email address too through Julia, for if you have any additional questions after the workshop. So I'll leave it open there if anyone has any questions for me. just going to take a look here.